Representative Bernie Willis and Representative Ty Mathews. Thank you for joining me on Message from the House.
Thanks for having us.
New podcast. What do we think about the name?
I love it.
This is, I think the format, the set, everything about this is perfect.
We were a little worried that people weren't going to get the play on words right, but, Message from the House, read it at the Senate.
Right.
Trying to be, quirky, I guess.
Yeah, I like
those who have never heard it, they probably won't understand.
I know, but
it's
now they will.
Exactly.
So we have a fun topic to discuss today. We're going to talk about NASA. I think it's only fitting to ask, do either of you believe in aliens?
Ooh, man, we're starting off on a tough question. Do we need to get like a
Is this
theological
controversial?
debate here and everything, right?
I don't know. I worried. I was like, is this too controversial? But
No.
Well, you might want to
it's not-
ask him.
it's not
He's the
so
Air
big.
Force guy, so he may have some
Okay.
classified secrets that I'm not sure he can disclose or not.
that's
That's
true.
right. Many times I'll say I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you, right? You just
Yeah,
you don't want that as part of your podcast.
Yeah, but, well,
It's one of those things that, having spent a lot of my life in the air, in places that are unusual environments, you see things on a regular basis that you just can't quite understand. And you can't process, you can't explain it. So whenever you have a lot of, the history of unexplained things that have happened, especially in our airspace, I always tell people there are so many things that I have seen that after I realized the explanation of it, I went, oh, okay, well, that kind of makes sense.
right.
The one example I have of that, the one thing that I thought was an unidentified flying object, was on the ocean, on the ocean surface, and I was in an F-16 at probably thousands of feet above the water. Whenever I realized there was a dome on top of the surface of the water that was going faster than me, and I was going like 500 knots, and it's moving away from me on the surface of the water. And I'm just looking at it going, okay, this is unusual. And I'm talking to other people in my flight over the radio. You see that, and then someone says, well, that's the B-1. And it's so close to the water, and it's so close to breaking the sound barrier that the shock wave is causing this bubble of just humid air that is turning into a little cloud bubble that you could not see through. Like, you could not see the aircraft, right? So I always tell people there are just unexplained things, and we see things that we can't quite process, but sometimes they are natural phenomenon of other things. So
Yeah.
doesn't mean that there aren't other things that, who knows? But that's part of the problem, is that we just don't know.
That was a great answer. that was really
First-hand
neat.
experience
I know.
there,
I'm
right?
visualizing that, flying over the ocean, seeing something like that. Yeah.
I think my closest experience has been seeing Starlink in the sky. Have you all seen that yet?
I
No.
haven't seen it.
Oh, it's like a lights up and it's a straight line of just dots. You just
Oh,
kinda
wow.
pause there and it's Starlink. So
Yeah, I live in the city with a lot of light pollution. I'd have to go
A lot
farther out
harder to see
Northwest
those
Ohio.
things in
Yeah.
the city, you're right.
Neat. I think that was great. Thank you so much. It's supposed to be
Sure.
lighthearted. I actually learned something during it. I think that's
yeah, I did too. Yeah.
So I want to, start this off by talking to folks who may have not heard about this conversation at all. When did this push to bring NASA's headquarters to Ohio start, and where do things kind of stand right now? Either of you want to take that one?
Yeah, for me, at least from my perspective, it was probably a couple months ago. I had to guess like 3. Watching what Congressman Miller and his conversations with the Trump administration, and watching closely on his statements, talking to some other stakeholders here in the state, I've been very passionate about emerging tech and attracting different institutions here to Ohio. And what better than NASA, right? So when I saw Congressman Miller messaging that, saw Jobs Ohio come out, and then the governor, like, we have to get on board. We have to be that state that says come to Ohio, because we have a lot to offer.
Absolutely. Willis?
I think this is part of the conversations that we've been having for a while. This particular part of it, the NASA portion of that, just happens, I think, to dovetail well into the other things that we've been doing, because we're already at a kind of a center of gravity for everything aviation and aerospace, and the things that I keep telling people about us being the home of aviation is obvious in everything that's happening around our space. We have, it's easy for us to say, well, we just passed a bill to make the Wright Flyer the actual official state aircraft. And that we hold that position in history with the Wright brothers, right? But if you look at what's going on and what has happened just over the last few years, us being a leader in unmanned aviation technology, us then being able to capture advanced air mobility with a National Center of Excellence sitting right in my little district at the Springfield Municipal Airport. And the things around that have brought so much international flair. It has brought people into the state that would have never probably been attracted here, to the point now that Joby Aviation is building electric flying aircraft at the Dayton International Airport this year. Anduril brings the future of aviation with, artificial intelligence driven, call it drone technology, whatever, but it is the future of aviation. And when you look at those things and how they connect to our entire aerospace microcosm, it's kind of to me, it's an obvious choice for something like NASA to be basing into.
And you touched on it just a minute ago about the Wright brothers. Ohio has a very dense history when it comes to space travel, air travel. Kind of talk me through that so viewers can be reminded.
So the funny part is people always talk about the advances in the last century in aviation and space, and they fail to recognize the fact that the majority of people that you talk about in those spaces are, the Neil Armstrongs, the Wright brothers, right? To the Neil Armstrongs, to John Glenn's, and those are Ohio natives, right? We already hold so much of that history, and we're just building on it now. And I think I think we're a logical place with NASA already having what I consider to be national assets inside Ohio, with NASA Glenn just being a portion of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have such an infrastructure here with our installations, whether it's Air Force or NASA currently. We have the talent here. We've produced more astronauts than any other state. So it's not a far-fetched idea that, yeah, your headquarters can be here, and guess what? Ohioans don't have to leave the state, go to DC, to go to Florida to work for NASA. You can stay right here, and you have a workforce right here that's ready and available.
That's a great point. And not too far from your district in Wapakoneta, that
Yeah.
was the birthplace of.
Here's another place that gets kind of forgotten with NASA is NASA Armstrong. It's Sandusky. You look this up. It's pretty crazy. It's this huge vaulted, these huge doors that close, and you can test in a vacuumed facility the impacts on a shuttle. So it's one of the only places in the United States you can do any testing like that. And that's in Sandusky, Ohio, right? So there is multiple things, not just in Cleveland, but in the Cleveland area and northern Ohio, that really brings a lot to the table for NASA to come here.
Do you think geographically Ohio is a good place as well for anybody to bring, a headquarters and especially NASA of all things?
I personally do. I think when you look at the university structure, we have a lot of pipelines with engineers, STEM majors. We're in the heart of it all, right? Our location is great. I believe I heard a stat, and this is just paraphrasing. This isn't exact numbers here, but they ran algorithms on how close are you to the majority of the population in the United States. So I believe they said like 60 to 80% of the population you're within 600 miles of if you locate in Ohio. So logistically, it does absolutely make sense. And when you look at the major assets as a nation that we have, being closer to the East Coast, I think it really does make sense.
Yeah, the moniker of being at the crossroads of America really is, it's obvious in the things, especially that have happened in the economic development front across the entire state. When I mentioned Joby Aviation and the Dayton Airport, which literally sits just off the corner of I-70 and I-75, there's just something to that. The ability logistically for a lot of companies that look at Ohio and say, is this a place that I want to develop in and build and, it turn into this, much larger thing? I think it's an easy sell for them, and that's been proven over the last few years, especially with large investments in Ohio.
Yeah, and I want to open up the floor. You touched on this as well, but again, if you could just emphasize like the specific infrastructure and just research capabilities that the state has to house NASA, I think it would be really important for folks to understand the scope.
Yeah, when I look at this is not just about NASA either. I think there's a lot of potential for Ohio to land other things, private sector and other government institutions that want to come here. And the why. Why Ohio? Well, specifically for NASA, we mentioned those two facilities in northern Ohio with NASA Glenn and Armstrong. We have the workforce, we have the pipelines, but going down to closer to where Bernie's from, Wright-Patterson, the Air Force Research Laboratories there, the amount of institutional knowledge that we already have here, there's colonels, generals, privates, sergeants going to Wright-Patterson that love their experience there. And hey, they may get stationed at the Pentagon, but they're going to remember how great Ohio was. And once they retire, it's again another pipeline. And Bernie, I'm not sure if you see any other. You talked about a little bit about the advanced air mobility. I think this is it all kind of nets together. And with Andrew now here, we can go on and on and on.
It's true. I mean, when I said national assets inside the state of Ohio, they're all in that list of things. But we also have things that are, and when you mention the participation that our higher education institutions have had in just the aviation side and moving forward toward aerospace. We have there are places in Ohio where you can do hypersonic testing in wind tunnels that don't exist elsewhere. And so there are high level classified kind of work on behalf of our organizations with the Air Force Research Lab that they can't necessarily do as closely as they can to come to one of our higher education institutions and say, hey, we really would like to put this into there, but we need for you to have a classified space. And they've done those kind of things. And it's because we've had forward-looking administrators in those organizations that have said, hey, we're going to start meeting the needs for research in these spaces. And they're just things that you can't do elsewhere. Puts Ohio at the pinnacle for these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to phrase it uniquely. Flying things in the sky. We're talking about it. Drones. We want to transition. Obviously, there's a lot of focus on drones and
Ooh.
technology. I want to start first with, Wright-Patterson needing to close because of drones flying around in that airspace. We've seen hundreds of sightings in Western Ohio of large drones or masses of drones. Can you just talk me through, is there any explanation of the increase in sightings? Should folks be worried? Should they not?
I think there's one initial, when I was in Iraq in 2022, I worked with counter drone, and that was my whole purpose was counter drone. It's called counter UAS, CUAS. So if you see that term, it's counter unmanned aerial system. So I've worked a decent amount with CUAS, and it's kind of like, hey, Olivia, there's stuff in the sky, right? Well, tonight you're going to go out and you're going to look up in the sky and try to find something. It is very, very hard to determine what's a drone and what's an aircraft. I mean, the altitudes, it's very, very, it's funny. Something will be flying 500 feet above you. It could be a plane, 2,000 feet above you, right? So I think a lot of it is initially you start thinking you're seeing things, and that's not me saying that there's not drones out there, right?
Right.
It is a very complex issue on how you actually deal with these with federal regulations. So it is something that I know we're both very passionate about. So, Bernie, I don't know if you've seen things flying around or not, but
I have not, but I've had constituents call with real concerns.
Yeah.
And there are things that are flying around that I don't think we're quite sure, who's controlling them, but it doesn't mean that they're not people who are out there flying them around to do things. This lowest level of thing where you have someone who has private property somewhere. Let's say they like to hunt on their private property and they find that people are flying drones over their property, and from their perspective, the drones are just there to scare away whatever it is that they're hunting, right? And so they're those kind of issues. But when you talked about Wright-Patterson, I mean, to my knowledge, I've been here since just prior to 9/11. To my knowledge, there's only 2 times that we've actually shut down the airspace, like said over the airwaves, we're shutting down the airspace at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And one of them was 9/11, and the other one was last December, whenever things just showed up in the airspace. And those were serious security concerns. Whenever they say those words, they mean it. It wasn't just some odd person who is out there. They have really no good idea of what was going on there. And so lots of concerns trickle down from national conversation in places like New Jersey, where there was a lot of stuff going on that wasn't well explained. We had the president get up, after the beginning, when he came in, he was saying, hey, the military knows where these aircraft are, coming from and going to, and all those things. And, I said, well, I'm going to trust that what he's saying is true, but from my perspective, I haven't seen any of that. And, Ty and I both still hold our military security clearances. And one of the things we've asked is that our local FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force give us a briefing on what the threat is at some level, so that we can make sure that in the legislature we're not trying to pass something that's going to be counter or that is going to cause a problem down the road for whatever some of these things might be, because there are people out there doing things that they shouldn't be with drones. And I only highlight that to say that our first bill from last General Assembly, right, HB 77, and it'll be the first time that Ohio has law that we can use to take care of some of those nefarious activities, specifically over our places where we have critical infrastructure, where those military bases are, and that we can actually prosecute people inside the state of Ohio, not having to go find one of the U.S. attorneys to take someone to court over these things. We need that because we really need to protect our airspace for all of that economic development and other things we want to have happen.
Yeah, I think I'll take a pause probably on the drone conversation because I think you brought up a great point there of your military service and that background that helps you be in a place to craft really strong legislation that helps your constituents because you have that, background knowledge. So if you just want to tell folks, a little bit about both of your time in the service so they get a better understanding, like, look, these guys are qualified. They, seen and done things that not the normal Ohioan has probably seen and done.
Yeah, I'll be brief on me because I want to just loop this all back around
Yeah.
to one central point. Is I still currently serve in the Ohio Army National Guard. I'm a captain. Served in the last 10 years. I serve here in Columbus at the 37th Infantry Brigade headquarters. I'm a S3 officer, plans officer. Again, never thought I'd be involved in counter drone or anything, flying, being an infantry guy. But again, just circling this back around, we have such opportunity here in Ohio. I mean, it is borderline crisis on some of these issues we're seeing with drones, entering airspaces that they're not supposed to be. And I'll just keep it at that. There's more grave concerns than what we're even talking about here, right? But never let a crisis go wasted, right? What we just talked about, Anduril, NASA. Let's solve that problem right here in Ohio because you have representatives like Bernie Willis. Before I was here thinking about this, because that legislation that is being implemented, companies look at that. Where can we go and take our company and actually be able to fly? There's not too many states that are really ironing this out. So what Representative Willis has done is started the pathway of Joby. You can fly here in Ohio, but guess what? There are parameters, right? So I just want to applaud Representative Willis's efforts on this. It just brings us all together, our strong veteran workforce here that will just plug in right into these companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to hear about your background.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on what Representative Mathews was saying. Just say that Representative Adam Holmes, who was our chairman last General Assembly in the Aviation Aerospace Committee, he had been in this space for the prior 4 or 5 years on the governor's team to talk about aviation aerospace, and so we were able to capture all that knowledge, and thankfully we still have him, although he's in the energy space right now, but we continue, and he's just a great wealth of knowledge, and he's a resource for that, and he was the impetus of getting these things moving. So when I say we got to push HB 77 through, he was at the very beginning of that and helped us to get to where we are. My background is long and storied. It would take too long to tell you the whole thing. So it's 32 years of military service, 36 years in the uniform, Air Force active duty that came to the Ohio Air National Guard and was there on active duty with the 178th Fighter Wing at the time that became the 178th Wing that flew out F-16s, converted to the MQ-1 in the unmanned aviation space, and now flies the MQ-9 Reaper over there. And that's a mission that's been going, people don't realize, for 13 years now. They've been flying a 24/7, 365 combat mission out of that small municipal airport in Springfield. Changed the entire way that everyone did business, for sure. But I left there and went to the Air Force Reserve. I'd had a short stint in the acquisition and finance side and went back to the big enterprise, the Life Cycle Management Center over there to work for the 1s and 3 stars over there to help us acquire things down the road for the Air Force before retiring in 2023. So a lot of time of doing a lot of fun things. At one point in there, I got to go to a federal law enforcement school and see that side. So I'm bringing a lot of different things to the space that's all kind of wrapped into aviation and aerospace, but has a lot of other portions that kind of go along with it from, from finance to the law enforcement side. Definitely helps inform the questions that come up when we're trying to pass these particular kinds of laws to do, more and more things to protect this airspace, to make sure that we're able to have, additional development and all the testing and things that need to happen right now, because we have all the opportunity and the pieces and parts to do it in Ohio.
Right. And that kind of jumps into the next question of, do you feel that Ohio needs more laws related to this space, drones, flying? What do you foresee for this General Assembly and moving forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of this has to be solved at the federal level, and obviously there's things we can do to advocate for that. I think there needs to be some stipulations out there, right? And I know there's a couple things that Representative Willis and I have already started touching on. To me, this uh, new frontier is pretty complex when you're bringing in AI and now cybersecurity into this too, because this all plays together. So we're definitely chewing on some legislation, but again, I think a lot of this is we're kind of waiting to see what the feds really push down.
The conversations we ended up with in the last General Assembly went from that kind of basic construct that mirrors most of the federal aviation regulations, to make sure, again, that we could, if needed, prosecute someone inside the state of Ohio without having to go to federal law. That was just the starting point. The second portion, with the longer conversation we had, was on aerial surveillance specifically, from both the public perspective and from the law enforcement perspective, because as we go down other things in the current budget bill, right, we have a new pilot project that's specifically about drones for first responders. Those are already being used across our state, but we need to make sure that we at least have a basic framework for those organizations to operate under, with kinds of equipment that will be able to interoperate across jurisdictions. And we're trying to make sure that we help them solve those problems, not to try to drive the conversation too much, but to Representative Mathews' point, try to stay in harmony with the federal regulations while helping our first responders develop that, and protecting the public from our first responders potentially stepping over a boundary. And so we want to make sure that we are very clear on what the boundaries are in those things. And that all goes to making sure that the airspace is accessible, that it's harmonized across who wants to use it, and that we make sure that if someone's stepping outside the bounds, that we have some ability to do something about it.
Yeah. And then I want to loop back around, since we're quickly running out of time. We'll say, maybe we should just send them the podcast. I think y'all have both made a great argument for why this headquarters should come
Right.
to Ohio and other big infrastructure projects. But a
Absolutely.
one sentence sales pitch to the folks, if they were going to watch this, why NASA, why Ohio? I
Great
know,
question.
a little tough
Yeah.
to condense
Closing
it.
on
Maybe two. I'll give you two sentences.
Yeah, man. I would say look at our history.
Yep.
We have a proven track record. This isn't just some random state coming out here and saying, please, please bring your headquarters here. We have a proven track record. We're willing to work with you, and just come to the table and we'll see what happens.
I would agree. I mean, we're already the home of aviation, and aerospace goes right along with it. We have everything from the history to the modern, the things that I didn't say in there along the lines of advanced air mobility and having that center of excellence here. Like, we already have electrified aircraft that fly into, recharge in, and continue all the way across the United States from another company called Beta Aviation. I mean, they're already doing the future of aviation here, and it so easily connects in the aerospace markets. I think we're just poised to be exactly the spot that they need to be.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. I mean, I had the opportunity, Sam had the opportunity to come, with you to Springfield this summer and just see all the technology. And I think you all put it perfectly.
You got to see that black fly electric aircraft fly around the airport all on its own.
I know, I was a little scared. I told you, I said, wait, there's no one flying. Because it's massive. You think a drone, you think it's compact,
Yep.
but pretty neat.
This is a drone that you can get in and sit in and go
I know.
fly around.
Pretty neat and a little scary at the same time.
It's
But
incredible.
Jetsons, right? We're
Yeah,
almost there.
I know. Meet the Robinsons. That was a good one.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies.
It was a good one.
That's
That was a
great.
good one. All right. Well, thank you guys both so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on. I think this was a great conversation. And
Absolutely.
want to plug our socials really quickly. You can follow us on social media at Ohio House GOP Caucus on Facebook, the Ohio House _GOP on Instagram, and you can subscribe to our YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Look at that.
Awesome.
Nailed it.
We're a podcast now. Thank you all again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.